everyone. Welcome back to the Common Connected podcast. I'm your host, Janine Halloran, and on today's podcast, I get a chance to speak with Dr. Chinwé Williams. She is amazing. She is a licensed professional counselor. She's a board-certified counselor and a counselor educator and supervisor, and she's also certified as an EMDR therapist, and she earned her doctorate in counselor education and practice from Georgia State University and her master's from the University of Georgia. She's been working with young people and teenagers and families and professionals for over 18 years, and she is warm and thoughtful and lovely, and we have a great conversation all about our teenagers and how we can help them with stress and when we should be concerned about the stress level in their lives and things that we can do to help the kids and teens in our lives when they are dealing with stress. I hope you enjoy our conversation. Dr. Chinwé, thanks so much for coming on the Common Connected podcast. Welcome.
Thanks so much, Janine, for having me. This is such a treat.
I am so excited to have you be able to come on and share a little bit about your journey and how you got to where you are today.
Thanks so much. Yes, is it okay if I just jump in?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Go right ahead.
Okay. Yeah. So I love this question. And I also sort of feel nervous about the question because I'm like, where do I start? I don't want to say too much. But I started my career as a high school counselor. That was not my intention. I knew I wanted to study psychology, and that's what I did in school. Always have been very, very curious about human behavior. Why do people do the things that they do? And so that I knew that was going to be my career trajectory. Not sure exactly where I would land. Did my master's at the University of Georgia in counseling, but there was an opening for a school counselor. And I was like, I don't know anything about schools, but I've been in a school. and I wasn't that far removed at that point. I was in my early 20s. Not so far removed from just the high school experience. And so that's what I did. I took my first job right out of my master's program, working at a high school as a professional school counselor. And I always say that that probably was my most challenging and also equal parts most rewarding position. I loved engaging with the students. And what was beautiful, Janine, and you know this so well, is when you're working with young people, it's a beautiful experience, but there's honestly, if we're being really honest, there's only so much you can do and only so far you can take them without their caring, supportive adults, family members being part of the ride. And so that was a wonderful thing that I learned during my time as a school counselor is the connection starts in the therapy room, or me visiting the classroom, showing up at lunchtime in the cafeteria, hanging out on the football field. And that was awesome. But then bringing in parents and teachers and coaches and mentors and small group leaders, all of the people who are important in the life of that child or that student was extremely rewarding. And my school supported that. And so we ran groups for parents. We ran groups for teachers. We supported teachers. We supported everybody who was in the life of that child. And so that really is what kind of stood out from my experience there. There's a saying, I don't know if it's a saying, I've heard people say that every child needs 3 to 5 people that are not biological to be part of their orbit, part of their lives, 3 to 5 adults. And that rings so true to me back then and now. And so fast forward, I went on to get my doctorate in counseling, practice and education. I taught at the graduate counseling level for a few years and just have been really honored and blessed to be able to still do this work, working with adolescents, but also working with young adults and their families. So that's kind of where I am now. I've also been fortunate to write a couple of books for teenagers specifically, and then also for caring adults, those people that are in a young person's life, a child or a teenager, and want to just really invest in that young person. So that's kind of my trajectory in a nutshell.
I think it's so interesting to hear that that you went into high school counseling. There is nothing. I was a counselor myself as well in schools, and there's an intensity that people do not quite understand unless you've lived the intensity of working in a school as a school counselor. Every day is different. You're never bored. And you get to learn so much, and it's very hard and it's very challenging, but it is, like you said, very rewarding when you can, and you learn so much from the kids. And I love the community aspect that you brought to your program. I mean, that is huge. And I've heard that same information about caring adults in terms of combating ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences. It's a positive childhood experience to have at least 1 to 2 caring adults. And I think I love that. I think it's so healing and helpful for kids to be able to have that. And
That's that, that's exactly right. And that's one of the questions that I ask my teenagers in the clinical room. If I'm
yeah.
honest, I ask adults as well, who are those people that know you inside and out? And we all most of us have heard about just the CDC report. Actually, it's a report that came from the US Surgeon General that talks about loneliness and how loneliness is an epidemic in our society and how it can be so harmful to not just our psychological well-being, but our physical well-being. So that question that was really resonant for me as a school counselor back then, but I still inquire today is important. Who are those people that know you inside and out? Who are those people that know your excellent points, but maybe not also, but not also not your great points? Who knows your dreams? Who knows the things that you're challenged by? So that is, that's what I learned back then, and still I think is important today.
You know what's so funny? I actually was reading that report yesterday. No kidding.
Seriously?
Seriously. Because of the connection piece,
Yes.
because I wanted to really dig in a little bit more and understand the negative effects that that disconnection can have and the things that we can do, as an individual, as a society, in our workplaces. How do we help build the connection? Because it's so overlooked, I think, and it's so healing, and it just keeps coming up in everything I'm reading and looking at. I can't stop seeing connection. And
Yes.
I can't help but dig into it now because now I've seen it. So now I'm digging.
That's how research goes, right? You
Yes.
go looking for one thing and investigating one thing, and then it just takes you down a path, and it's like, okay, like this is interesting.
Yes, absolutely. And you know what? I have to say, I sort of did the same thing around stress a little bit ago. And so, it's just things that come up as you're working with kids. And so I'd love to hear a definition about stress from you and why it's not always bad.
Yes, absolutely. So, stress, my definition is really that stress is a normal reaction to everyday pressures, demands, obligations. And stress is not something that is in and of itself bad, right? So, stress can motivate us, especially in the short term, to do the things that maybe we would rather not do. So, for example, we are recording in December and it is really cold and the days are shorter and we're not getting a whole lot of sunlight, especially depending on where you are in the country. And a lot of my clients are saying to me, it's harder to get out of bed. But I have to because I've got 3 kids that I've got to make breakfast for, pack up their book bags, and get them out the door. And so when we know that there's something that we have to do, that stress can be motivating, right? It can push us to do those things that we need to do in our lives. And for a young person, we're talking a lot about students and teenagers. Stress can push a teenager to practice for their dance recital when they otherwise wouldn't want to. Stress can push a teenager to study for that big math exam when they would rather be out hanging out with their friends, right? So stress in and of itself is not bad. Stress is a part of life, especially part of modern day life. But chronic stress, as you know, Janine, is something different, right? Stress can kind of go in the wrong direction. For example, when we're experiencing unrelenting stress from a difficult relationship, or maybe it's not inherently difficult, but there's a conflict that we're facing, and it just feels like, oh, I just can't see eye to eye with this person, and it lasts way too long. Young people are experiencing what feels like to them unrelenting school pressures. Some people are living in home environments that are dysfunctional, and maybe even extremely harmful or violent. So that type of stress, unchecked, which is very different from our morning commute when traffic is wild and we feel stressed, but then we finally get to our destination and we're like, "Ooh, that was terrible," right? But if it's ongoing and again, unrelenting, that can contribute to a host of psychological, physiological, mental health problems. We know that studies are showing that prolonged stress can increase our blood pressure. It can weaken our immune system. It can contribute to diseases such as obesity, heart disease, diabetes. And Janine, you and I know this all too well. Chronic stress can lead to anxiety and depression. And those are disorders that are really common in young people.
Yes, absolutely. And the thing is, it can be a little bit challenging because, teenagers are learning how to regulate their emotions. They're learning to self-regulate in general, and things can get really stressful just in general in school. What should we be looking for the people in the audience who have teenagers, for the teachers in the audience, for the counselors in the audience? What are the signs that we need to be paying attention to for our teens when it's getting to that point where it's over and above what is expected?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I love that you pointed out that for adolescents, sometimes the behaviors that they're exhibiting, the behaviors that teachers and parents and caring adults are observing, it can be difficult to tell, all right, is this sort of like part of like the normal ups and downs of adolescent development that is to be expected versus something that may be more of a cause for concern? So I love that you asked that. What I want to highlight is that, stress again for young people isn't uncommon. It's something that we should expect for young people, younger children. Tension at home is typically the primary source of stress. If there's some kind of family discord, or maybe there's a loss or some maybe separation going on at home. But for teenagers, it's usually what's happening at school: academic pressures, school pressures. Teenagers may be struggling with bullying or making friends. They may be anxious about tests and grades. And the signs of stress in a young person, specifically a teenager, will vary, but the common things that we see clinically is an increase in irritability and anger. And stressed out kids don't always have the words, right? And that's part of what we do, is teach them emotional literacy and being able to identify what it is that they're feeling. But a lot of kids really don't have the words to be able to say, I'm super stressed out. So they may act out behaviorally. They may be more short-tempered, more argumentative with parents or even teachers or coaches. And so if you have a child that is usually kind of laid back and easygoing, sort of let the water roll off their back kind of personality, and now you're seeing them get into conflicts, they're slamming doors, slamming drawers, that is something that we want to pay attention to, because that's a shift in their behavior. They're more irritable, more angry, maybe showing some signs of defiance. And if it's consistent, and we'll kind of talk about how we diagnose something like depression. And the other thing that we see that is a sign of stress is trouble sleeping or eating, sleeping too much or sleeping very little, or feeling like you've slept 6, 7, 8 hours, but you wake up and you don't feel rested at all. And then eating changes, right? Eating too much or too little can be a really common reaction to stress. And if you have a child who loves a certain dish that you make and you make it and they're like, Mom, I'm not really that hungry, right? We know that stress often shows up in the gut. So that's something that we want to pay attention to, in addition to a drop in their academic performance, not turning in assignments, maybe procrastinating, which we know can be also a sign of anxiety. So when I'm in the clinical room with parents, what I share with them is that yes, a lot of what I just mentioned can be a sign of just, what's expected during the ups and downs and the hormonal flux of adolescence, because we know that the brain structures haven't even fully developed in adolescence and won't until the mid 20s. So, yes, we're going to expect kind of the ups and downs with regard to mood and some irritability. But if you're seeing some of these signs and symptoms that I just mentioned, more days than not, more days than not, um, over a 2 week period, and it's really impacting how they show up. Clinically, we say functioning, right? But I tell parents, if it's impacting how they show up at school, at home, on the ball field, and if they're starting to withdraw from not just you, which might be typical, it's actually very typical in adolescence for some adolescents to begin to withdraw from family. But if they're also withdrawing from their peers, that's a cause for concern. And if we're seeing this, up to a 2 week period or more, then that's when we want some form of intervention.
Yeah, it's and that's so tricky, right? Because those are things that we may see with our teenagers as they go along, but you have to sort of understand and have an understanding of their baseline to then know this is different, this is out of the ordinary, this is unexpected, and it's really impacting their daily life. How are they getting up for school? How are they interacting with their peers? Are they not anymore? And so it really is, it's nuanced, right? It's a little bit tricky because are they just being a typical teenager? Is this something I need to worry about? And it really becomes about like how are they actually acting during the day? How are they able to do their activities of daily living? And if they're really not able to do it, that's significant and that needs to be addressed.
And you bring up such an excellent point. You will only know this if you are a student of your child,
Yeah.
right? And I always say, as a former high school counselor, those years are rough. They're rough for kids, but they're also rough for parents. And sometimes we'll see turmoil and conflict. Again, young people may be more argumentative, and sometimes we as parents or grown-ups, we get in our feelings, right? And I've seen this way too many times in family sessions where there becomes a bit of a divide, and parents really aren't aware of what's going on in their kids' life. So I always also share with parents, even during that time when kids seem like they don't need you, my goodness, they really, really need you. They may need you more than ever because they're being faced with really tough situations. They're making difficult decisions. So, as much as possible, even in the midst of a conflict, try to spend that one-on-one time with your teenager once or twice a week. We are all so busy, but what you're doing is you're investing in them. You're providing them undivided attention. You're letting them know that they matter to you. You're helping them to feel seen. And when teenagers feel seen, heard, and supported, they're more willing to open up about some challenges that they're facing. So then you don't even have, it takes the guesswork out, right? You don't have to decide, is this a normal part of adolescence? Or is my child getting bullied or having trouble academically or not feeling like they're fitting in?
Yes, absolutely. It's that when you have that connection, again, coming back to the connection, when you have that connection with them and things are not going well, then you can return to that safety, that no lovely connection that you have with them. And then if things are starting to get bad, even when they leave the house, they will come back to you and they will ask you for support when you have that good base together.
That's exactly right.
I love that. And so if we are seeing that our teenagers, and I'm a mom of two teenagers, and I have to say I actually find my teenagers delightful and I people are always like, "What?" Like I just do. I love my teens. They're phenomenal. They're hilarious. It's not like they're not teenagers. They get cranky, you know what I mean? But I enjoy them and I love playing with them. I love connecting with them. And I keep my eye out. So like just to make sure like is something happening? Is something going on here? What's happening? So if we're noticing that something is happening with our teenagers, we're noticing that something is off, something is wrong, they're experiencing that like higher than what we would anticipate stress. What would you say to the families, the caring adults? How can we support teens when they're going through that?
Yeah, so just kind of going back to that connection, having conversations, which it sounds like you have like amazing teenagers. And as a high school counselor, like that was like my favorite population, really, and still is because they are witty and funny, and they see the world in really unique ways, and they're interesting. So for parents like you that have that amazing connection already, this is easier. It's easier to have that conversation when you're noticing that their mental health is declining or something seems off. It may be easier, especially if you have a counseling degree, to say, "Hey, this is what I've noticed, and I'm concerned, and I just want to check in to see how you're doing." And for parents maybe who don't have a child that is as open, maybe more introverted or unwilling to share, or again, maybe they don't have the words, what I encourage parents to do is again, make that investment, develop a cadence of we're going to do something. If you can't do once a week, once a month, that's just for you. If you have multiple kids in the home, really spending that one-on-one time with each child can develop that connection that allows the child to eventually open up. And then the other thing, Janine, I'm sure you heard this before. I used to say this, I can't tell you, probably 3 times a week working with teenagers and their families at the school. And I say it a lot now in my private practice. When a child comes to you, let's say you have no clue if there's anything going on from a mental health perspective, but your teenager comes to you and says something hard and heavy about what's going on with them or what's happening at school with a peer, freak out on the inside, but not the outside, right? And that's something as counselors, we practice all the time, but I encourage parents not to what and then go into lecture and fix it, and then sometimes there's like a tinge of judgment. Well, you shouldn't be hanging out with that crowd, and I can't believe that friend, I knew her since she was 6 years old and now she's doing what? And we have that inclination, we have that urge, it's normal. But then if our kids can't talk to us about one thing, and maybe it's like on a level of 5, they may not come to us about the next thing that could be at the level 10. So in teenagers, this is what I've also discovered, will test us, right? They're going to test us with information and kind of leave breadcrumbs just to see what our response is. And it's not a manipulative thing. They're just trying to figure out, am I safe or can I be safe? Can I trust this person, mom, dad, coach, counselor, with pieces of me that may not always be ideal, or situations that I'm going through that isn't always scrubbed and beautiful and polished. We all want to show up with our full selves, shadow parts and all. And so that's the case, especially for a teen who's just facing so much. So the other thing I would say just generally is to just establish a rhythm of check-ins, and parents and caregivers can start with themselves, just letting your child know maybe when you've had a rough day and what coping skills you will use to address it. So it's not dumping on your child, it's actually really modeling, hey, we all go through stress, and this is what we can do to take care of ourselves. So those are just a couple. There's so many in terms of even just, helping the child to change some of the words and thoughts that they use. But we can talk about that in just a moment. But I'll pause right there. But those are just some initial thoughts that I had.
You know what? I think I love the freak out on the inside, because I always try to keep parents in that same space, right? Come at to the conversation with an air of curiosity, right? Like just come sort of as neutrally as you possibly can, and then freak out later. You can freak out later. That's completely okay. They may have just told you some really big stuff, and that's like really intense, and it feels really bad, and bad stuff could be happening because there's a lot of nonsense that goes on in high schools. So you want,
Yes.
but you want to be able to have the conversation and actually have them hear that, notice that you are actually hearing them and seeing them and paying attention to what they're saying, and then dealing with whatever you need to later. You know what I mean? But it's really hard not to freak out on the outside.
It's hard not to freak out, and that urge is there. And to your point, you're human too as a parent or a
Yeah.
grown up. So once you get through that moment, that's where you call your best girlfriend or guy friend or your sister or your counselor or your
Yeah.
spouse and say, okay, I need to download, right?
Yeah.
So that's really helpful. The other thing that I am thinking of right now is if it's not something that's like super, extreme or serious where you have to intervene right away, I encourage parents to avoid fixing, right? It's natural to want to help our kids with problems. It's natural for every parent to want to swoop in and help a child who seems to be in distress. I'm doing air quotes right now, whatever that may be. It could be a real stressor or a perceived stressor. But what I've learned from my young clients is that they then don't, if a parent is constantly swooping in to fix, the child then does not learn healthy coping skills. So we want our children to be able to, critically think about this problem that they're facing, especially if it's a low stakes problems. Children should be able to at least attempt to address, and we as parents can be the guide.
I think that's lovely. I really do. It's one of those things where you don't want to be able to fix everything for them because then they won't learn it themselves. And especially when it comes to teenagers, I've had other guests talk about the question of, do you want me to just listen right now, or do you want my help with a problem solving solution? Like I can help you problem solve it, or if you just want me to listen, I'll listen, because sometimes they do want help solving it, and sometimes it's just like, no, I just want to complain about it.
Yes. Right. And when you're offering the detailed help and it's brilliant, they've tuned you out because they
Right.
really just needed you to listen.
Yeah, exactly. And as teenagers will let you know, they're like, no, I just want you to listen. My daughter will say, I know I don't want any help problem solving. I got it. I just need you to listen to this nonsense that I went through today.
Yeah, listen to this nonsense that happened in third period, mom. It was wild. Yes.
She spills the tea like in the car on the ride home. Like the girl cannot help it. Um, So, what strategies would you actually recommend directly to your teen clients? If you had a teen client in front of you and they were really stressed out and overwhelmed and really struggling, what would you say to them?
Yes, I love this question. So the first thing is to validate their experience, and that's something that I educate parents about all the time. And actually, I do corporate webinars where I'm like, okay, this is how you validate your direct reports experience or your colleagues, and this applies to every single relationship. But for teenagers in my therapy room, whatever they're saying, I am validating that this experience is meaningful and feels real to them. So for us as grown-ups, maybe we wouldn't react in the same way given the same set of circumstances. But for this young person, this is how they feel. So that's the first thing. And then once I validate it and they know that I am with them and I see them and I know that this is important and maybe feels really big for them, that's when we sort of apply some scrutiny around the way that they are thinking about the situation, the way that they're thinking about themselves in relation to the situation. So, one of the biggest interventions, Janine, comes from cognitive behavioral therapy, which is basically combating negative, unhelpful thoughts. And I tend to say unhelpful thoughts versus negative. So for a teenager who maybe on repeat will say, I'm horrible at math, or, I hate my body, or I'm never going to make the team. I'm never going to get into that school. So why bother complete the application? Why bother try out? We all are prone to negative or unhelpful thoughts, especially when life is like throwing us a curveball, right? So again, I'm validating that this feels real to them, but I also share with them that we can sometimes fall into that trap of negative, unproductive, or unhelpful thoughts that just make us feel worse, right? And it sort of takes our power away. It can even, I know when I've engaged in some negative thoughts, my energy gets zapped. I'm like, okay, well, as opposed to trying to figure out, okay, what's within my control? What is it that I can do? And so really reminding students and teenagers that their thoughts can impact their emotions, which can then subsequently impact their behaviors. And so let's be very, very let's be detectives. Like, how much of this is true? If it's true, is it helpful? Is there another thought that has more utility? Or more, can be more productive. And then asking them to remember that it doesn't mean that we necessarily want them to be overly positive, right? So this isn't toxic positivity. This isn't dismissing their lived experience. It's just, assessing, is this thought accurate? And reminding themselves of the times when things have worked out, the times that they have made improvements. And maybe if this team isn't the thing for you, what is the thing that is going to, take you to the next level, or what's that activity that you're passionate about? So just engaging in those conversations, and parents can do this easily as well once you sort of learn kind of the steps to combating negative thoughts.
Yes, I actually talk with my clients about changing the playlist. Like
Oh, I
this.
love that. Oh, say more about that, Janine. I love that.
So it's the same thing, right? Like you're talking about those negative thoughts, those unhelpful thoughts that are running through your mind. And so we'll make a list of those, and then I'll say, okay, now we need to change the playlist. So let's come up with some other statements that you can say instead. And I will have my clients write them in their notes on their phone so they have them with them so they can look at it and like remember and remind themselves. Or sometimes I have them put it on like sticky notes and put it on their mirror so they look at it before they go out to school in the morning. Like, we're changing the playlist.
I love that so much. That reminds me of a saying that I used to say, let's flip the script. Yeah.
Yes.
Let's flip the script. So that's beautiful. And I love the component of writing it down on like a sticky, putting it on your mirror, on your computer, keeping it with you, because we all need those reminders.
Yep. Absolutely. And I say to my clients all the time, like it's so easy to go to those unhelpful places, those negative thoughts. Like they just pop in sort of
They
like
pop in.
without like it just, and you don't even notice it initially, and then I talk about like you just gotta first we're noticing, and now we're changing like so we've noticed it, we don't have to believe it, and we can think of something else, we can look at that different playlist that we have. So it's very tricky. I say to them, it sounds simple, it's not easy, right?
Yes, yes, that's so true. I love that.
Thank you so much. I'm so having such a good time talking with you. I want to respect your time, and I know we both have other, December things to get on with in our days. But before I go, I like to just ask all of my guests, what do you do to rest and recharge? What are your coping skills?
Yes. So like you, Janine, I'm a mom, I'm a professional. We wear so many hats, and we take care of people, right? And I think it's important for us to make sure that we are taking care of people well. But that involves making sure that we are well and that we're taking care of ourselves. So for me, something that I have been really, really intentional about is creating downtime, because it doesn't always come, right? It's not always something that is just, at the ready, at my fingertips. It's something that I have to be intentional about because life is so busy, especially during the holiday months and Maycember and just different parts of the year. Just like I'm putting in at 10 o'clock, I have this client. At 12 o'clock, I've got to pick up my kid from school and take him to the dentist. At 3 o'clock, I've got to run to the grocery store. Just like I have every single thing listed in my calendar, I have got to put on my calendar time for me. And just like kids and teens, adults need downtime and time to do those things that are, creative, unstructured, focused, right, on their passions. It could be music, it could be art. For me, I love being outside in nature. Now in Georgia, even in Georgia, it's a little cooler, but I find that if I sort of bundle up and get outside, especially when I'm starting to feel stress. And that's the thing, right? When we start to feel stress, we have a tendency to maybe not do those things that will help us to decrease our stress because we're thinking we don't have enough time. But I have been really intentional about building that in my schedule. And then also, when I'm noticing that I'm stressed, getting outside and in nature, and it just like 15 or 20 minutes, right? Not a long time. I'm not necessarily running. I may be walking briskly. And I'm also just sort of noticing my surroundings, right? Which brings in a little bit of that mindfulness component. And right now, the leaves are starting to fall, but there's still leaves that are marigold and yellow and beautiful shades of like orange and red, and just attending to that, attending to the sky, attending to the birds, attending to my, my neighbors, Christmas lights. Those things help me to feel calmer in my mind and in my body.
Oh, I love that you put it on your schedule. I love that you put it on your schedule. I think that is brilliant because then it becomes one of those things where it's like, well, it's on my schedule, so I've got to do it.
Yes. And Janine, by the way, and sometimes things will supersede it, right?
Of
We have
course.
clinical emergencies, we have kid emergencies, we have, plumbing emergencies, and then you can't get it done at that time. But if it's on your schedule, it's in your head, right? You're going to try to fit it in if you can that day, or the next day, there it is, same time available to you.
Oh my gosh, I could talk to you all day. This is phenomenal. If people want to know more about your work and about your new book coming out, where should they go?
Oh, thanks so much for asking. So my website is drchinwaywilliams.com, and we'll have information about the new book very, very soon, maybe by the time that this gets out there. And there's also information just about me in general. For those who engage in social media, I'm active on Instagram, and my Instagram handle is Dr. Chinwé Williams, Dr. Chinwé Williams. And I do have a new book, and I feel like you've inspired parts of it, Janine, because your work is so incredible. But we have a new book coming out in February called Calm, Courageous, and Connected. You didn't know that.
I did.
We didn't talk about that. Connected is part of the title, and it's a parent's guide for raising emotionally resilient kids. And then we've got some workbooks for kids that will accompany it that focuses on specific emotions: anger, sadness, and worry.
Oh my gosh, that sounds amazing. I feel like that would be such a benefit and bonus. Just the emotional intelligence, the emotional understanding, labeling it makes it easier to regulate. It's just so impactful and powerful. I am so thankful that I got a chance to connect with you and you came on the podcast. I really appreciate your time today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This was a fun conversation.
Thank you. And thank you for everybody who's listening. If you like this podcast, please feel free to share it with your friends and colleagues. And as always, don't forget about yourself. Take a few minutes, have a little fun, and have an awesome day.